Welcome to Haunted Talks, the official podcast of The Haunted Walk, offering thematic walking tours in Kingston, Ottawa, and Toronto, Ontario. My name is Jim Dean. I am the creative director of the company, and I really appreciate you joining us for today's show. A very special welcome to any first-time listeners, and to our old friends. It's always great to spend a bit of time with you. At one time or another, most of us have fantasized about cutting all ties, disappearing into the night, and starting a new life somewhere else, under a new name. The idea of shedding our identity, like a snake would shed its skin, can be a tempting prospect when the pressures of life feel overwhelming. But could you go to the ultimate extreme and fake your own death to change the course of your life? Before we get to that, congratulations to everyone. You have survived the winter. Spring has officially arrived, and obviously it's a much better time to be out doing walking tours. And we do have tours running more regularly now in Kingston, Ottawa, and Toronto. And in fact, we've posted most of our schedule right through to Labor Day, including our city tours, but also our haunted walk experiences at places like Black Creek Pioneer Village, Upper Canada Pioneer Village, and the Mackenzie King Estate. So if you're going to be traveling to our cities or you happen to live in them, it's a great time to start planning ahead so that you can join us this summer. Have you ever wanted to take part in a paranormal investigation at a haunted location? Well, this Saturday, May 26th in Ottawa, we're going to give you that chance. We are partnering with Phantoms of Yore, a paranormal investigation group, and the Ottawa Jail Hostel for a special evening we're calling Whispers of the Carleton County Jail, a paranormal evening. Over the past few weeks, Phantoms of Yore have been conducting several investigations at the old jail. And I can assure you it's a very haunted place, a great history, and that's where we run our Ghosts in the Gallows and Crime and Punishment tours through on a regular basis. Now, during these series of investigations, Phantoms of Yore have uncovered some very interesting evidence, some recordings that are going to blow your mind, and they'll be sharing those with us on May 26th. Now, the evening is going to include a reveal of some of this evidence. It's also going to include our Ghosts in the Gallows tour, so you'll get to hear the ghost stories about the jail, and you will also get the chance yourself to use some of the tools of the paranormal investigators and conduct your own experiments on the 8th floor, that top floor of the jail that has been preserved, where death row and the gallows are located. So this is going to be an exceptional evening. Tickets are very limited. Only 21 tickets available, very short supply. So if you're interested, you're going to want to grab those as soon as you can. For Whispers of the Carleton County Jail, a paranormal evening, or for any of our tours, please visit our website, which is hauntedwalk.com. We'd also love to connect with you on social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all at Haunted Walk. The idea of faking your own death is something reporter and writer Elizabeth Greenwood set out to explore in her recent book, Playing Dead, A Journey Through the World of Death Fraud. She went so far to see how difficult it would be to get herself declared dead.
I did. So the Philippines was a place I heard mentioned by insurance investigators again and again. It's a place that they're often traipsing out to do their work. One of the reasons is, and this isn't just in the Philippines, it's in many countries, but at the time I was doing my research, the Philippines really came up. They just have a very robust infrastructure for fraud. So this is anything from black market morgues, where derelicts are picked up off the street and kind of held on ice for a while until someone wants to come claim the body, to, easily greased palms and documents that of all kinds that are available. So I knew I had to get out there. And I did, and I got hooked up with two local fixers by the names of Snooky and Bong. They were awesome. And we had a fabulous day where their forger, who does a lot of different documents for them when they're doing their work, anything from, diplomas to driver's licenses, we waited for him to cook up my death certificate along with a police report detailing the fiery car crash that took my life. So this day was mostly spent of just us kind of shooting the shit and waiting for this thing to get done. And it did get done. And it was, of the highest quality, really. And when I presented them to Steve, one of the insurance fraud investigators who spends, much of his life looking at these documents, he said, not bad. So that felt pretty gratifying.
I asked Elizabeth how it felt to hold her own death certificate in her hands.
Oh, it was eerie, as you can imagine. I mean, I think up when I was, kind of on the trail up until that point, I said, get it? Am I going to get it? I was like, am I going to be thinking really about that? And I don't want to go home empty-handed. So then once I had the documents, that kind of like cold wind of a realization, I said, oh my God, this is my name. And this is very clerical, font saying I'm dead. And it was really unsettling. It was very unsettling.
The concept of faking death for some kind of gain is something we are very familiar with from works of fiction. Harry Potter, Romeo and Juliet, Sherlock Holmes, the Dark Knight trilogy, Saw, Mission Impossible, all contain examples where the fake death of a central character plays a pivotal role. But how often does it happen in the real world? And who is attempting to pull off such a hoax?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's also one of the paradoxical aspects of researching the subject is that people who fake their deaths successfully are considered dead, right? So we only hear about the people whose plans went awry. So it's really hard to get a real sense of numbers. But I can tell you in terms of people who try to commit life insurance fraud, that, at least according to the investigators I spoke with, whose main bread and butter is going after these guys, that is like in the several hundred per year. And that, again, so it's got to be much more because that's only talking to a few specific individuals. Granted, they're the best at what they do. So in terms of insurance fraud, I would guesstimate around several thousand, at least in the United States. And then in terms of the kind of crazy cases you see in the news of, this guy was considered dead for 20 years and then got pulled over for a broken taillight. I still have alerts on the Google alerts for me from when I was researching this book. And I swear they come up at least once a week. So it's far more than you would imagine. From what I saw in my research, the person most likely to fake his death, and I say his because it's a he, it's usually men, and again, people who get caught doing this, it tends to be middle-aged men, usually with families, usually who have gotten themselves into some kind of hot water legally, financially, or maritally, and it's usually a combination of all three things. And they usually are trying to fake their death to get out of some bad situation as a temporary means of escape. So again, avoiding a prison sentence, avoiding paying back, the millions of dollars you defrauded from your investors. And it's kind of a very short-sighted scheme because usually the idea is that they'll fake their death, come back in a few years when things have cooled down and, live happily ever after. And as you can imagine, that's really just not the way it goes.
David Freeland certainly fit that profile. He was a well-known politician in New Jersey in the late 1970s. He faked his own death in 1985 while awaiting sentencing for taking kickbacks from a Teamsters pension fund. While Freeland was awaiting sentencing, on September 2, 1985, the U.S. Coast Guard received a report that he had gone missing while scuba diving in the Bahamas. As part of a well-calculated plan, witnesses described seeing him taking painkillers before entering the water. His body was never recovered, which drew the suspicion of authorities, who then issued a warrant for his arrest.
So drownings where a body does not materialize within a few days always look really suspicious. We get this idea of, drowning's perfect, then I can take this body with me into my next life. Well, not so much, because, again, if your whole background and context leading up to that drowning looks suspicious, your drowning is going to also look suspicious. So those really don't fly, believe it or not. What I heard time and again of ways that are just a bit more seamless that people really do disappear often is hiking. You go out for a hike and you never came back. It's a bit more open-ended as to what happened. Did you stumble down a ravine? Were you eaten by a mountain lion? Were you kidnapped off the trail? Whatever it is. So it's less of a kind of clear-cut narrative, which is, of course, less easy for investigators to look into.
Using a fake U.S. passport and traveling under the name Richard Smith Harley, Freeland went on the lam for the next 2 years, visiting countries around the world, including Kenya, France, Italy, Hong Kong, and Singapore. He worked his way up to become the #1 fugitive wanted by the United States Marshals Service. Eventually, Freeland ends up in the Maldives, where instead of lying low, he opens a string of successful scuba diving shops, using his own image to help promote the business. His opulent lifestyle eventually attracted the notice of local officials, and he was captured by U.S. Marshals just after Christmas in 1987. For his crimes, he spent the next 8 years in a federal prison in Florida. You would think faking your own death must be some sort of crime in most countries. Turns out, that's not the case.
Faking your death is not illegal in the sense that there is no law, in the United States at least, called faking your own death. To advance the notion that you are deceased in and of itself is not illegal. However, a lot of the ancillary crimes that you would have to commit in order to maintain the ruse for a long time are illegal. So if you assume another identity, if you use someone else's social security number, that's fraud, and that's very illegal. If you are not paying taxes to Uncle Sam while you're dead, tax evasion, that's illegal. So these sorts of things. I spoke to a judge in the state of Rhode Island who presided over a very famous case in that state of Adam Emery, who has been, speculated that he faked his death many years ago. This judge had the task of declaring Emery dead without a body so the parents could claim insurance money. And we had a long conversation about the kind of legal ramifications of death fraud. And he said that, he thinks there is this very narrow slice of territory one could occupy where you basically, live on an island with a backpack full of cash and, never even take out a library card in someone else's name. However, doing that for a long time, it'd be very tough.
One of the most well-known recent cases of death fraud comes from the UK, about a man somewhat ironically named John Darwin. Elizabeth spent several days with him, interviewing him about his attempt and the ramifications he has faced since being caught.
He is such an incredible story. So John Darwin, canoe man, as he said, that he's synonymous with faking death in the UK. In March of 2002, Darwin found himself in some real financial troubles. Basically, he had gotten involved in a set of shady real estate deals, and in his mind, the whole house of cards was about to come crashing down. So, with the help of his wife, they decided to fake his death, and they did it by him staging a kayaking accident. He lived on the coast in the north of England in a little village called Seaton Carew. So he paddled out to sea one day, had stored in his kayak with him, cash and several changes of clothes. He crash landed on the shore at nighttime. His wife came and picked him up in a parking lot. He drove him to the train station where he took a train to the opposite coast of England and camped out on the western shore for a few weeks. During this time, he grew very gaunt and thin. Meanwhile, there was funeral being held for him. He had 2 adult sons, by the way, who thought that he was dead. His wife was in the process of claiming insurance on John's life, pensions, etc. This goes on for a few weeks. He ended up then returning to Seaton Carew, where he and Anne owned this very large home where they rented out several rooms as a bedsit. So John, now presumed dead, now in this very elaborate disguise, returns to his town and actually lives next door to his own home while he's presumed dead, while his sons are mourning him. And in this time, he managed to secure a real UK passport in the name of a person called John Jones, who was born around the same time as Darwin, but he died in childhood. He did this all kind of above board. It wasn't, trolling the docs with, shady men to buy these documents. He just managed to get the birth certificate for Jones through the county clerk and then, went through all the various steps to get a passport in this person's name. He traveled to over a dozen different countries while he was dead. He and Anne ended up relocating to Panama briefly, where they bought a penthouse in Panama City and some jungle land out in the country. John ended up returning from the dead in December of 2007, I believe, 2007 or 2008. He was never caught. He did turn himself in. The reason being, he said that it had gotten too much on his conscience, being away from his sons, having them think he was dead. And again, he had always anticipated faking his death as this short-term solution to a problem. So he was ready to come back, face the music, and reintegrate into his life, which, in a lot of ways he has. He did end up going to jail for 3 years and 3 months. And after he was released from prison, I did catch up with him and spend a few days, and he kind of walked me how he did it and what his life is like now, and it was totally fascinating. It was so interesting chatting with people in Seton Carew about Darwin because, he is kind of their local celebrity. I think not many people had heard of this town before his disappearance, but when he returned in late 2007, early 2008, this town was just swarmed with reporters and TV crews for months and months. So chatting with locals around, they did kind of have this attitude, it's kind of like an eye-rolly thing, like, oh, Darwin, But there was this kind of respect for him where they say so many of our politicians lie and take all this money, and, he did kind of stick it to the man. He did get away for a while, and is that so wrong? A regular person, trying to get one over on the big government and insurance companies and all these things. So he definitely was not reviled there, at least. It's true.
While John Darwin has a bit of a folk hero vibe to his story, attempting to fake a death usually comes at a very heavy price. Could you stand to put your immediate family and friends through the process of grieving your death while you're still alive? How do you think they would respond if they ever found out you were faking it?
This was something that, when I initially became enamored with the subject, I definitely didn't think about. I was just thinking more about getting out of Dodge and what would it be like, et cetera, et cetera. But as time went on and I spoke with more people, people who had gotten away with it for a while and whose families were affected, I thought that is such an important perspective to have. It affects all people negatively, even if you were someone like Anne, who was a co-conspirator with Darwin. She knew he wasn't dead. She ended up serving more time in prison than he did. She served 3 years, 6 months in prison. And from what I understand, the relationship with her sons is quite obviously very strained. So she knew, and it was still bad for her. There's another case like that I write about in the book of a father-son duo, Raymond and Jonathan Roth. Raymond staged a drowning here in New York a few years back and had his son, Jonathan, call it into the police, say my dad went swimming and he drowned. Well, again, Jonathan ended up doing time alongside Raymond in prison, and it was really bad, and he became estranged from most of his family. So even if it's very bad, obviously, the even kind of worse scenario is not knowing and presuming that a father or loved one was dead when in fact they weren't. And there's a woman I spoke with about that very experience. Her name is Lisa Boozin. Basically, she spent her entire life thinking that her father died when she was a toddler, only to learn in her late 30s that that was not the case, but then stumbling upon his real obituary, learning that he had actually died only a few months earlier. So this was just, totally devastating to her whole idea of her biography and who she was in the world. And she described as that knowledge is just like the worst insult you could possibly sustain. So there is this real other side that I think people don't consider. And it makes the whole act look far less glamorous from that vantage.
As Elizabeth has done in-depth research and has firsthand experience with death fraud, I couldn't resist asking her, what are the most important considerations if one is contemplating trying to fake their own death?
What I always want to say is it's not a how-to, and I don't recommend anyone do this. But if you are thinking about it, I think the first question to ask yourself is, who's going to be looking for you? And that will really inform the steps one needs to take. So, for example, if you are just a regular Joe and you're not in legal or financial troubles, it might not be necessary for you to fake your death. There's nothing illegal about disappearing, about just not coming home one day. The death aspect is really this kind of final theatrical thing to put, as it were, the last nail in the coffin. So that might not be necessary for everyone. And then the other question of who's going to be looking for you. If you're trying to evade a prison sentence, if you have stolen great deals of money from, investors or insurance companies or what have you, there are people who are going to be very incentivized to keep looking for you, right? So that might be to try to clarify where you should go and how you should get there. So that's a big one. And then the other part where it gets very tricky is thinking about money, about how you're going to sustain yourself. One of the first things any investigators will do if someone disappears is start looking into their financial transactions as of late. So if you're moving large amounts of money, liquidating assets right before you suddenly drown, it looks really fishy. So how are you going to take that money with you into your next life? And what are you going to do in your next life? Because if you're a licensed professional of any kind, you can't do that. Again, you would have to get out another identity to become a lawyer or pass the bar in some other state, for example. So what will you do, and how will you have enough money coming in to really earn a decent living?
Given how difficult it is to account for people who have successfully faked their own death, I was curious if Elizabeth had heard from any of these people since publishing her book.
Oh gosh, I haven't, much to my regret. If anyone out there is listening to Haunted Walk and is dead and wants to talk, holler at me. I get a lot of queries of people who reach out and say, oh, our friend's dad disappeared under these mysterious circumstances. What do you think? But what should we do? Blah, blah, blah. And then I usually just point them to a very good private investigator. But unfortunately, I've not had that call yet. Still hopeful, though.
As we were wrapping up our conversation, I asked Elizabeth what she was working on next.
I'm working on another book of narrative nonfiction, and this is tentatively titled Love Lockdown, Dating, Sex, and Marriage Inside America's Prison System. And this is about people who seek relationships with the incarcerated. So I'm tracing about 6 couples, all of whom met while one partner was behind bars, and just hearing their stories of how this all happened and what it means to them and the ways they find to make love work under some, pretty staggering obstacles. You can check out my website at lizgreenwood.com or follow me on Instagram and Twitter at lizgreenwood4u, number 4, letter U.
A very special thank you to Elizabeth Greenwood for joining us for the episode. And just a reminder, her very entertaining book is called Playing Dead, A Journey Through the World of Death Fraud. And that is available through our website, hauntedwalk.com/podcasts. We'll put the Amazon link up there, and you can find it anywhere fine books are sold. As always, thank you to our audio editor, Michelle Dennis, and Kevin McLeod at incompetech.com for the additional music. A reminder to make sure to grab your tickets for Whispers of the Carleton County Jail in Ottawa, taking place on Saturday, May 26th. Those tickets are going to go extremely fast, so make sure you grab those if you'd like to join us. Be sure to connect with us on social media, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, all at Haunted Walk, to see what special events and new things we have going on. Until we meet again, sweet dreams.